I'm endlessly fascinated and curious about the world around us, about business, about politics, about the arts, about culture, developments, social issues, and the people. Most importantly, about the people that are shaping our future. Every night, I get the opportunity to have conversations, to dive into conversations with thought leaders, with change makers, entrepreneurs, politicians, and everyday heroes who unpack the ideas and stories that I think matter to all of us. What's the future of our economy? What's the future of our country? How do we build stronger communities? What can we learn from music, theater, sports, politics, the arts? How does policy shape our real lives? What does leadership look like, real leadership in today's environment? If it's interesting and relevant and topical and we're talking about it, you'll hear about it here at 6 o'clock on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I want to have real conversations, in-depth conversations. These are ideas we're sharing. This is the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Thanks for joining me. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're going to be talking about oil and gas and natural resources in Alberta today with Lisa Baiton, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. Coming to us, as I mentioned, from Calgary. Lisa's got this incredible experience in politics, in public relations, and government affairs over the course of her career. And she's an expert on what's going on from a natural resources standpoint. So given what's going on worldwide, geopolitically, I thought it'd be great to check in with her as to what she thinks about a couple of the issues that I think all of us are a little bit worried about. One of the things that our Prime Minister has been talking about, lots of people have been talking about, Lisa, is that economic strength matters so much in today's geopolitical environment. Why?
Oh boy, does it ever. And I think, the events we've been seeing really over the last few years, but even over the last few weeks, have really brutally enforced that. We're living through such an intense period of unpredictable global change. And really what's most unsettling is not just the pace of change, but also the realization that, the world is fundamentally changed. We're living in a new global paradigm. Just over the past few years, we saw the invasion of Russia and Ukraine. We've seen the conflict between Israel and Palestine. We've seen global tariffs and trade wars initiated by the US. And in just the past few weeks, we've seen regime change in Venezuela. We've seen significant pressure on Cuba, violence in Mexico, a new war in the Middle East, and all of these global events are really rewriting the global geopolitical order and permanently reshaping decades-old trading relationships. So, at the core of all of that, economic strength is geopolitical strength.
So, do you think power dynamics are changing because of the oil and gas business?
Well, first, let me just say Canada really stands out in a world where countries are increasingly using economic power and energy resources and even military leverage to secure a strategic advantage and influence global trade patterns. And energy, and particularly oil and gas, really sits at the center of all of that. Oil and gas isn't just a commodity. They're strategic assets. They shape alliances. They're the foundation for economic growth. They define national security. And the stark reality is that countries that can supply affordable energy wield influence, and those that can't are at risk. And so, in that sense, we are very well positioned as Canadians. But I would just say, Canada has its own things to work on. We have our own economic challenges. We've seen productivity growth stall in recent years. Our GDP growth is sluggish. Investment lags our peers. So, we just need to work with a lot more urgency to ensure that Canada doesn't fall further behind at precisely the moment when global competition is intensifying.
So you mentioned productivity. Lots of people have been talking about whether we can increase production. We've been talking about increased capacity of pipelines, and we have Donald Trump saying that we've got to have everyone come and open up the Straits of Hormuz. What can Canada do at this time of oil and natural gas prices increases, lack of supply? What can Canada fill the void?
I think currently Canada is doing whatever it can to deliver oil and natural gas to global markets. We are at record levels of production. We are at record levels of exports for both oil and natural gas. But that is because of our most recently completed export projects, the Trans Mountain Expansion Pipeline and LNG Canada. So the honest to God truth, Brian, is that, in the short term, there's very minimal ability for Canadian producers to further increase production in response to supply disruptions arising from the Middle East conflict. Any meaningful production growth would require additional pipelines and pipeline capacity and export capacity, which we don't have available today. But we're hopeful for in the medium term.
Is this going to put extra pressure on building that pipeline right away?
I think it does a lot for. I really want to underscore that the current conflict really is impacting the lives of tens of millions of families, and it's having a rippling effect around the world. But if there is a silver lining to this conflict, it is really underscoring the need as Canadians to take a much larger role in terms of not just our own energy and economic security, but that of our allies around the globe.
I heard that there was some massive release, like 400 million barrels or something like that from oil reserves. Does Canada have big oil reserves that we can release?
Canada doesn't have a strategic oil reserve.
Why not?
Our country I know, right? Despite our country.
We have like oil. We have reserves of maple syrup, for God's sake. We do. We have huge reserves of maple syrup. Why don't we have reserves of oil?
I am not an expert in maple syrup reserves, but I can tell you is Canada doesn't have its own strategic oil reserve. We are one of the largest untapped oil and natural gas resources on the planet, but I think it's because, we have a relatively small population and we have significant capacity to maintain and potentially grow our energy exports, all while providing for Canadians. So, I think, it's probably worth having a conversation whether Canada should have a strategic oil reserve, but that's going to require a lot of conversations amongst federal and provincial governments and industry.
Seriously, we should. You think about, people are talking about, when to use their dishwasher and washing machine, so use it at the cheapest time. People are using cars as batteries. Why don't we have a strategic oil reserve? We should. Have we just never thought about it? Have we debated it? Has it been an issue in the past?
Again, it's, Canadian, I don't want to say complacency. I mean, Canadians are really blessed. We have, the fourth and fifth largest oil and natural gas reserves on the planet. And so, we've really never faced, at least in my lifetime, faced this kind of global geopolitical upheaval globally. But, if I look over this last
Sure, we
week,
have. Oil went up dramatically when Russia attacked Ukraine. Oil went up dramatically in the oil embargo. We've had times like this that it would have been really helpful to have a big oil reserve.
Sure, but there's, just this, constant, as I outlined earlier in an earlier question, kind of this confluence of major geopolitical flashpoint after another, after another, after another. And cumulatively, I think that is really underscoring for Canadians that we need to not take our oil and gas reserves for granted, and we need to think about them in a larger global construct and our obligations within that construct, as opposed to kind of a one-off event that happened 4 years ago or 30 or 40 years
No,
ago.
you're right, but I do think that your comment about complacency is regrettably very true and apt. I think that we said that there wasn't a business case for liquefied natural gas plants on the Atlantic coast, but gosh, we sure wish we had it when Russia invaded Ukraine, and probably we wish it even more today when we've got this this war going on in the Middle East. I think that establishing connections with India and China to sell our energy, we should have been doing long ago, and they sure could use that oil and gas shipments today when the Straits of Hormuz are closed. And strategic oil reserve, gosh, I think we probably should have had one, and kept a certain amount back, both to make money when prices go up, but also to help out the world when supply is diminished. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in 2 minutes with Lisa Baiton. I'm going to ask her about U.S., the Canadian-U.S. relationship, particularly as it's obviously impacted by energy, which is what she's all about today. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. My guest tonight is Lisa Baiton. Lisa, you're the CEO of a big association. Can you tell everyone what is the association?
I represent Canada's upstream oil and natural gas producers. So, um, a lot of people mistakenly think of us as just an Alberta-based organization. We're not. We represent the oil and natural gas producers from coast to coast, onshore and offshore. And, we're part of an industry that accounts for 20% of Canada's entire balance of trade.
20%. Obviously, the U.S. has been our most important trading partner. We ship a whole bunch of gas and oil to the United States. How has our relationship with the U.S. changed since Donald Trump has become president of the United States?
I would say it's fundamentally changed. For decades, Canada has always viewed the U.S. as a stable, low-risk trading partner. But I really want to underscore that relationship remains critically important. They're still one of the largest and most sought-after markets on the planet. But the Canada-U.S. relationship for sure has fundamentally changed. And I think the lesson we've learned recently is that in the case of oil and gas, again, I mentioned we represent almost 20%, or the oil and gas industry represents almost 20% of Canada's entire balance of trade. And most of what we produce, over 90%, currently goes to a single customer. And so I think the lesson that we have learned recently is that we probably shouldn't rely solely on one single customer, nor can we depend on the stability of the past. And I think, we're really seeing that awareness with Canadians, particularly over the last year. We're seeing public polls showing Canadians really don't trust our largest and closest trading partner anymore. I would say on the flip side, the strong majority of average Americans still very much support maintaining and growing trade with Canada. So it's as I said before, we're in a new geopolitical normal. And the world we knew before is gone, and we just have to learn to approach this new dynamic with the U.S. pragmatically. We have to be eyes wide open that the U.S. will always probably be our largest customer, but we should also probably do more to diversify markets and have the infrastructure and the projects necessary to get our goods directly to global markets without having to go to the U.S.
How do you balance that, Lisa? You think about how much gas gets shipped to the United States over pipelines that go from, where you are right now straight down to Houston, Texas, and take, oil and gas right to the refineries in the United States and frankly, liquefied natural gas plants in the Gulf of, what is it called now? The Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of America? I can never remember. And we've got this incredible trading relationship. But yet at the same time, our prime minister travels to Asia, comes back from China and says that China is right now the more dependable trading partner. So with that kind of a situation where so much of our trade is with the United States, but we've got to think about diversification, how do you balance that?
Brian, I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. And we are at this consequential moment in our country's history and in the binational relationship between the U.S. and Canada. But the reality is the U.S. is Canada's most consequential international relationship, period, full stop. And the partnership between our two countries is foundational to our shared prosperity and security. And so when we are in this kind of significant geopolitical and economic change, this interdependent relationship really continues to matter. On the oil and gas side, we have traded energy starting with natural gas for nearly 150 years. And in that 150 years, it's been virtually tariff-free for generations because of that mutually beneficial relationship. The U.S.
Seriously,
economy,
it's been tariff-free for 150 years?
as far as I know, I will fact check that and I'll come back to you.
That's
But
amazing. I didn't know that
I think
before.
I used the qualifier virtually tariff-free, but yes, for 150
So with
years.
all the different, tariffs on, we hear about McKinley back in the 1890s and all these other, back and forth. Energy has been primarily virtually tariff-free for 150 years with the United States. That's incredible.
But I think it speaks to the fact that, it is a mutually beneficial relationship. The U.S. economy benefits from purchasing reliable and secure Canadian oil and natural gas, and Canada benefits from having a fully integrated infrastructure directly tied to critical supply points in the largest oil and gas consuming market, again, on the planet. So, the fact is our infrastructure is highly integrated and has been built up over decades. We have refineries in the U.S. Midwest almost completely reliant on Canadian oil, and regions in the Pacific Northwest are dependent on Canadian natural gas. I think maybe we should pause there for a moment because one thing I think many people in central Canada, particularly Quebec and Ontario, don't fully understand is that although Canada has the largest, fourth and fifth largest oil and gas reserves on the planet, our country is not energy secure. Quebec and Ontario refineries actually rely very heavily on oil supplies delivered from into Canada from the U.S. And about half of both provinces' natural gas supplies also comes from the U.S. So it's a case where we can do two things at once.
Because we buy from the United States in Eastern Canada and we sell to the United States in Western Canada, right?
Yes,
Well, that makes sense.
an oversimplification, but yes, yeah.
But that's back to the theory of comparative advantage. It makes sense if we can not ship it as far in Eastern Canada by buying from the United States and make good money by selling it in Western Canada. That makes sense.
Yeah, but maybe I'll just conclude on this topic by saying two things. Our privileged access over decades and over a century to the U.S. Oil and natural gas market is really a foundation for Canada to launch its ambition to become the next global energy superpower. And so, although the relationship is challenging at the moment, there's really an opportunity to forge a renewed continental energy alliance that is attuned to the new global realities. But in parallel, we should absolutely be accelerating the development of new markets and new trading relationships to enhance our geopolitical strength. And I really want to make the point that market diversification for oil and natural gas, and by market diversification, I mean the ability to get our products directly to global markets without having to go through the US is not about replacement. Diversification just means growing the pie, growing our customer base, growing production, growing our exports, and ultimately growing the Canadian economy for Canadians.
Lisa, I've had numerous people on my show recently talking about sovereignty and about how it's critical to have sovereignty, not just from a territorial standpoint, but sovereignty in digital and AI and cloud. Do we need to have sovereignty in natural gas and in oil? Should we be building a pipeline between Western Canada and Eastern Canada north of the Great Lakes? Or are we trusting of the United States to ship our natural gas and oil over the US, over Michigan?
Uh, that is that's been long debated question. I mean, we've had this conversation in Canada before, including a discussion on an Energy East pipeline, which never ended up manifesting itself.
Because
But
it doesn't make economic sense, I'm told,
well,
but
I
it
think
might make political, geopolitical,
yeah,
national security sense.
again, the silver lining and all of the global geopolitical upheaval that we've been seeing is that has really underscored for us the need for us, how critical oil and natural gas is to our country's sovereignty, to our defense spending, to our national security, to our economic security. It's a conversation definitely worth having. And again, I'll go back to that market diversification point. We should be pursuing that in parallel to preserving our relationship with the largest market on the planet.
Our Prime Minister keeps talking about us being an energy superpower. Why is oil and natural gas so central to Canada's economic foundation right now, do you think?
Hmm. I think it's probably because despite the global challenges, Canada has something many countries don't. And we have a resource-rich, talent-heavy economy with the capacity to deliver really rapid, meaningful economic returns. And really, no industry is better positioned to do this right now than the Canadian oil and gas industry. Our sector is the most productive in the country. We generate
The most productive in the country?
Yes. We generate extraordinary economic value per hours worked, nearly 7 times the average of all other industries. And really, that productivity matters. It means higher wages, it means stronger public finances, and it ultimately means greater resilience during economic downturns and geopolitical volatility.
I was out in Alberta and Saskatchewan a week ago, and they talked about how too many Canadians don't realize that it's not just selling oil and natural gas, it's really contributing to national growth.
For sure.
Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely.
How?
Large scale energy projects, are not short-term bets. They're really nation building investments, and with lifespans that are measured in decades. And let me just chat a little bit. You mentioned LNG a little bit earlier. Canada's emerging LNG industry, and I will agree with you that we should have seized that
We should
opportunity.
have built that plant in Atlantic Canada that there was no business case for?
We should be the world's largest LNG exporter on the planet. But the good news is we kind of lost the last decade, but we have some policy pragmatism
Is it
and
true that we're shipping natural gas to Houston? They're converting it to liquefied natural gas and shipping it around the world at a higher price than we sell it to them at?
That has been the case, but we do have an emerging LNG industry, and it's really, a decade later, still one of the most exciting opportunities in a generation. The first phase of LNG Canada, at an estimated cost of $40 billion, represented the largest private investment in the history of our country, and it really put Canada on the map as a global LNG provider. There's a couple of other projects in the queue that are being considered by the new Major Projects Office. We have LNG Canada Phase 2, and there's also a project called the Salism Project, also an LNG project. And those two combined add another $60 billion in new investment if they proceed. So those are the kind of
$100 billion in LNG between those three investments. $100 billion.
correct.
That's huge.
That's massive. As it is huge. These projects really are critical because they create tens of thousands of jobs for Canadians. They grow GDP across the country. Importantly, they generate revenues for federal, provincial, and municipal governments. And those revenues in turn support healthcare and education and infrastructure and defense spending. And so there's actually a couple of more projects under construction. One is called Cedar LNG, and one is Wood Fiber LNG. And cumulatively, all of those projects are putting Canada on a credible track to become one of the top 5 LNG exporters in the world. So that really matters. Global demand.
So are these projects all in Alberta, or are we
No.
piping natural gas to Tidewater and then having the plant in BC or somewhere else?
So it benefits the entire economy. A lot of those projects that I mentioned are West Coast, on the West Coast of Canada, but it will obviously benefit. I should probably stop and say a lot of people don't know what LNG means. It just means liquefied natural gas. And so, although the actual export facilities might be on the west coast of Canada, it will benefit Canada broadly because you'll have an increase in natural gas production.
When I was in
And
Edmonton, I was
that,
told that a lot of these projects are involving Indigenous groups in the equity of them. Is
sure,
that the case?
there's
And so it's
Indigenous equity ownership is has almost become table stakes. And what a lot of people don't realize is the Canadian oil and gas industry is a leader not just in employing Indigenous peoples or using Indigenous-owned companies as part of the supply chain, but the Canadian oil and gas industry probably has the most private equity, Indigenous private equity ownership of any industry in the country.
I think that's great.
So, what else do you want to talk about?
So tell me about Trans Mountain. We're looking at a big expansion of that, I understand.
Um, I would say optimization and maybe expansion. Yeah, that really matters as well. I'll just whether it's a pipeline optimization or an expansion. They're both really important. On optimization alone, over the next 2 to 5 years, we're probably going to see an increase of export capacity by nearly 800,000 barrels per day on the oil side. Trans Mountain is already delivering results, and you want to go huge. Trans Mountain has already added an estimated $4 billion annually to industry revenues, and that has had a massive bump to our GDP and to, again, federal, provincial, municipal revenues. So those kind of things, whether it's optimization or expansion, it's really low-hanging fruit. These are the near-term opportunities that allow Canada to do that diversification and the ability to get our product directly to global markets without having to go to the U.S. And it enables us again to the discussion around the Middle East conflict and oil reserves. It allows us to play a much, much larger role in global energy security. And ultimately, on your point on we have been shipping our product to the U.S. and they've been selling it at a premium. If we are able to do some of the things we've been talking about, we'll be able to capture that full value for our treasured natural resources here in Canada for Canadians.
Lisa, I got to ask you a question. We've talked about that we haven't got this sort of sovereign pipeline to the east, that we didn't build the LNG facility on the Atlantic coast that we should have, that we haven't probably taken the pipeline capacity to the west coast that we should have, that we have been too dependent on shipping to the United States, that we haven't diversified, that we haven't built an oil reserve, et cetera, et cetera. I was at a really interesting conference where someone who I think Jean Charest, the former Premier of Quebec, former Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, said, in 20 years, we're going to look back and we're going to thank Donald Trump. Not because we agree with him, but because he's actually got us to do some of the things that we were too complacent about and we should have done long ago. What do you think? Do you think in 20 years we'll thank Donald Trump?
I think people are seeing, despite the upheaval and the chaos, I think, again, as I said earlier, a lot of things that have been happening over the past year have really been a wake-up call. The silver lining is that it has given Canadians a wake-up call on making sure that as a sovereign nation, that as a G7 partner, that as a NATO ally, we really need, we haven't been fully living up to our commitments under that, and we haven't fully protected our country, and we haven't leveraged our strengths. And I think the silver lining is that people have woken up to the need that we need to be less complacent and take some of these things a lot more seriously and get at it. Stop talking about it. Let's get at it.
We got to build. We got to build. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in 2 minutes with Lisa Baiton, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Association of Petroleum Products. And I'm going to challenge her. Lots of people say we've had peak oil. Are we still going to need demand for oil and gas? Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. My guest tonight is Lisa Baiton. She is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. Lisa, I've had the privilege of knowing for a couple of years. She's had a really quite an impressive background. She was the Managing Director, Head of Global Public Affairs at CPP Investments. Before that, she was Vice President and Practice Leads in Government Relations at Environics Research, and she was there for 6 years. She's been there for quite a while. She's got both an MBA from Schulich and an MBA from Northwestern University Kellogg School of Management, on top of a Master of Business Administration from the HKUST Business School. Where the heck is that?
It was actually a joint an MBA between the Schulich School of Business in Toronto, Kellogg in Chicago, with global electives done in Hong Kong.
And you got a BA in political science from the University of Saskatchewan. Did you grow up in Saskatchewan?
Yeah, born and raised.
Whereabouts?
Yeah.
In where?
Oh, in Swift Current,
Swift Current, Saskatchewan. So
Yeah.
you're
And
prairie.
interestingly, everybody thinks of Swift Current, Saskatchewan as an agricultural heartland, which it is. But my parents owned a small oil and gas servicing business, and unbeknownst to me, almost 4 decades into my career, I've almost come full circle, and I'm now working in the sector that my parents started in.
Your
So,
parents must be proud of you.
well, they're past, but I'm sure they are. Yeah.
That's great. Not that they're past, but it must be great that they're proud of you. I'm sure they are, from wherever they're looking down upon you from. Um, Take a step back. Some people say, we're all going to go green. We're going to have batteries and wind and solar, and all of this talk about oil and gas is irrelevant because we've reached peak oil. Is global demand going away?
Global demand for oil and gas is not going away. And in fact, global demand for energy writ large is growing so fast that it's not an either or an or discussion. It's an all of the above discussion. We are going to need all forms of energy for decades to come. Despite the commodity volatility and global geopolitical uncertainty, the long-term fundamentals on oil and gas demand are very clear. If you look at the traditional drivers, they're going to continue to push up energy demand, population growth, modernization economies, particularly throughout the global south and in the global north. That energy demand curve is changing rapidly and super fast. And that's really being driven by the push for more electrification and the development of data centers, which just consume
Suck
an
up the energy.
enormity of energy. And that's all about the implementation of artificial intelligence. So just as a data point for you, the US alone is projected to consume more energy in the year 2030 for processing data alone than what has been consumed for manufacturing all energy intensive goods, and that includes aluminum and steel and cement and chemicals. And if I look at natural gas, today it supplies about 40% of the incremental power demand driven by AI and data centers in the US. And, I
That's
guess,
incredible.
yeah,
That's incredible. You hear about steel and aluminum being so incredibly energy intensive, and you're saying that we're going to consume, or at least the United States is going to consume as much energy in manufacturing data for AI as it does for all those manufactured industries in the past.
yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah. Last year I was at CERAWeek in Houston. CERAWeek is kind of like the Davos for energy, and Larry Fink was one of the main speakers on the main stage. And anyone who works in institutional investing knows about Larry's annual letter. And And he was pretty blunt from the main stage. He said, yeah, there is no energy transition. What we're seeing is an energy addition because there is so much, the demand for energy writ large is growing so exponentially. We are just going to need all forms of energy, and the growth of renewables, for example, is simply just going to be layered on top of.
So if we've
Um,
got all this incredible demand for energy, and you're saying it's, going to only grow in the future, is Canada a good place to invest? Why has investor confidence in Canada weakened?
uh, Well, when you look at where a new demand for oil is coming from, you can see that the expected new oil demand is really nearly perfectly suited for Canadian oil. If you look at Europe or Australia or other regions, they're closing older, less profitable refineries. If you look at China and India, they're building new, larger, and more complex refining capacity, and that's designed to efficiently process heavier oils. India um, is expected to account for about 2.5 million barrels per day of demand growth by 2035, while petrochemical feedstocks are forecasted to account for about 2 million barrels per day of demand growth by 2030. And most of that growth is coming from China. So, Canada has a geographic advantage with shipping routes, both to all of these growing global markets, which are going to need the exact type of oil that Canada has and Canada produces.
Okay,
Uh,
okay, okay. I agree. Canada has all the ingredients to
yeah,
become
for
Canada's
sure.
next energy superpower, but everyone tells us that investor confidence is weakened. Has investor confidence weakened in Canada? And if so, why?
I would say I would call it the lost decade. Certainly over the last decade, I did spend a third of my career working for a top 10 global institutional investor, so I know how capital markets stitch together, and I know how investment capital flows. And policy and regulatory certainty or uncertainty is one of the main drivers on where capital gets allocated. And I would say in Canada over the last decade, we had a lost decade, and one that certainly uh, hamstrung, one of the biggest economic engines of our country. I would say in the last year, we've seen a pivot to policy pragmatism and a lot more optimism, a lot more realism about the importance of energy again to our sovereignty, to our national security, um, to defense, all of those things, as well as to our economic security. And so there has been a real pivot over the last year and work between the federal government and the provinces to make sure that Canada is getting its wheels on its wagon and getting its policy and regulatory construct right so we can be the choice destination for investment capital. I would say that we've come a long way after that long lost decade, but we certainly aren't there yet. We still have pancake stacks and pancake stacks of regulation in place that we need to address that makes Canada uncompetitive for global investment capital compared to other destinations.
So, Lisa, what do you think we need to do in Canada if we're going to restore our competitiveness?
Hmm. Again, it goes back to that investment capital around the world. Investment capital, it flows to wherever, you can find the two jurisdictions that offer the most clarity and regulatory and policy certainty and with the quickest ability to execute. And after years of uncertainty, investors still need those durable signals that Canada is serious about growth and competitiveness. And we really have to make sure that we as Canadians, I would say two things. One, that we don't fall back into the patterns of the past decade with, ever-changing regulatory regimes and distrust across jurisdictions. There's a couple of things, new federal methane rules and a proposal to significantly alter industrial carbon taxes that is going to impose billions of dollars of new costs onto the Canadian oil and gas industry when no other producing nation on the planet is doing the same. Those are the kind of things that makes Canada uncompetitive for investment capital at precisely the moment we need to be doing the opposite. So, we've had a pivot this last year with policy pragmatism and constructive partnership federally and provincially, and in discussion with key partners in industry. But we still have a lot to do.
So last question, if I could, Lisa Baiton, the CEO of the Canadian Petroleum Association, if Prime Minister Carney or the Minister of Energy sat down with you because they were passing through Calgary and they asked, what would you tell us? What do we got to do? What do you think Canada needs to do at this moment?
I would say very simply, we need policy pragmatism in energy policy, one that builds on our strengths, that accelerates investor confidence and actual investment into Canada, and make sure that those dollars get flow here into Canada and get invested here, and that positions Canada as a global energy superpower. We have the resources, we have the global demand for our products, we have the talent, and we have a once in a generation opportunity to turn Canada's natural resource wealth into lasting economic and geopolitical strength. So let's just get on with it and start building.
Can we be an economic superpower?
I think we can be. There's been a lot of really terrific work over this last year, a lot less complacency, but there's still a lot of heavy lifting to do. But I'm a proud Canadian. I have confidence in Canada's resilience. So I would
Lisa,
say
thanks so
yes.
much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. And I think that, the message that I draw is that we should have been thinking about some of these things in the past. Probably some people were, but we weren't as focused on them as we should have. And so therefore, frankly, Jean Charest may have been right that Donald Trump is waking us up and forcing us to do some of the things that we should be doing. I'm not sure about whether we need an oil and a gas pipeline that doesn't go through the United States. But, I had friends that were blocked on the Trans-Canada two-lane highway north of Thunder Bay this past week in snow. And the highways in the U.S. were open and plowed because they were 4-lane, and they've got better highways. And it's like an hour shorter to get from Saskatchewan to Ontario, at least southern Ontario, going through the United States than it is through Canada, because we don't have a 4-lane Trans-Canada highway. So if it makes sense to have a 4-line highway, it, I think, makes sense to have a pipeline that goes from Western Canada to Eastern Canada. I think the pipelines that are being built and the LNG facilities that are being built on the coast make a ton of sense. I think that the strategic reserve makes a ton of sense that we should be thinking about. And I think the diversification. And we're never going to get out of probably the United States being our major place to sell oil and gas to, but we've got to reduce our dependence on them. And if any company was selling so much to one customer, that company would have not been able to get credit, would not been able to have been sustainable long term. And we've got to start thinking in smarter strategic means. And as our Prime Minister said, waking up to this new world that may not be the world we like, but it's the world that exists. And so therefore we've got to be more strategic. And I think that Lisa Baiton is helping organize her industry to effectively do exactly that. So Lisa Baiton, I really appreciate you coming on the show, and thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online, even from Calgary, at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videos go up on my website, briancrombie.com, and on social media, my YouTube channel, etc., as soon as the radio show gets broadcast to air. All the best, Lisa. I hope to come visit you in Calgary sometime. Good night.
Awesome. Good to see you, Brian.